We appreciate all of the guests who have appeared on our show and sincerely thank them for providing you, our audience, with useful information. However, the advice our guests provide is theirs, and we encourage you to seek out a professional if you have specific questions about any topic we cover on the Crushing Debt Podcast. On this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast, pslfjobs.com.
Welcome to the Crushing Debt Podcast with your host, Florida attorney Sean Yesner, where our goal is to help you get rid of the financial bullies in your life.
So welcome back to this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast. My name is Sean Yesner, owner and founder of Yesner Law, and I am excited about our guest this week. However, before I get to him, I did want to mention our sponsor really quick. So those of you that have been longtime listeners know we have a longtime sponsor. His name is Sam Cohen. He owns Attorneys First Insurance, and what they do is they provide E&O coverage, malpractice coverage, errors and omissions coverage, all the same thing for attorneys and title companies literally all over the country. Now, I know Sam loves referrals in Florida, and he's also has a focus in Texas right now, but if you are an attorney or title company, or if you know an attorney and title company, and it's time to renew your malpractice coverage, definitely give Sam a buzz. Contact Sam. It's sam@attorneysfirst.com or www.attorneysfirst.com. However, I do want to turn our attention to my guest. So he is the founder and CEO of Pslfjobs.com. And so I want to tell you a little bit about PSLF Jobs first. It's the only jobs platform and resource dedicated to student loan borrowers and qualified employers who can recruit and retain talent through the student loan forgiveness programs. For over 10 years, the responsibility of PSLF navigation has fallen squarely on borrowers who are misled regularly by negligent loan servicers and an opportunistic private lending marketplace. The mission of PSLF Jobs is to support qualified employers in proactively driving the PSLF process for its employees and recruits, and to provide a jobs marketplace exclusively for qualified employers and student loan borrowers. And our guest today, the founder, CEO, director of PSLF Jobs, is Jason DiLorenzo. He was the founder, or I guess is the founder, of Doctors Without Quarters, a national student loan advisory and advocate for physicians. He's managed over $2 billion in federal loan debt positioned for PSLF. Over his Doctors Without Quarters tenure, he's recognized the need for a PSLF-only jobs platform for all graduates with high loan balances who've had an opportunity to be debt-free in 10 years by serving in a rewarding job. Since 2010, he's served as an expert lecturer and panelist for schools, hospitals, and partners nationally on the increasing complex and evolving topic of student loan debt, best practices, and federal loan legislation. He graduated from Stetson University here in Florida, and when he's not advocating for student loan borrowers, you'll find him outdoors on a hike or on his mountain bike. If he comes to your town, beware. His ping pong game is also on point. So with that, I want to welcome Jason DiLorenzo. Welcome, Jason.
That was an excellent summary. I could not said any of that better myself.
I think you did say all of that yourself. I've done a couple of topics here on the show about the PSLF program with different attorneys and different other people, but maybe let's take a step back a little bit.
Yeah.
PSLF, Public Service Loan Forgiveness. So why don't you just give a real basic overview first of what PSLF is, and then we'll get into what pslfjobs.com does and how you help.
Yep. So when we talk about federal loan forgiveness, there are several different broad strokes of that. There's, when we talk about the opportunity for the Biden administration to maybe even cancel student loan debt for all borrowers below certain thresholds, or we talk about some programs or states or federal programs where you work in certain areas, maybe underserved areas, in certain teaching roles, you can get loan forgiveness or loan repayment federally or from a state repayment program. Public service loan forgiveness is a broader program that was created by Congress in 2007 to encourage student loan borrowers to work in meaningful public service jobs. So that stroke of the brush is much broader than it is in loan forgiveness programs that are more specific to what you to your degree or working in a certain area or practice. It applies to anyone who works in a federal, state, or local government or agency job, right? So that's about 22 million jobs in the United States. If we talk about federal, state, and local government and agencies, think your public school teachers, your firefighters, those that work in city, state governments. Those are federal, state, and local agency employed individuals. And then you've got, on top of that, anyone who works for a 501c3 nonprofit organization. So that's going to be about 12 to 13 million people in the United States. So together, cumulatively, it's about 35 million jobs in the U.S. that qualify for public service loan forgiveness. It's a lot bigger than people think. And then when it comes to the student loan forgiveness component of that, you're required to work in a qualified job for 10 cumulative years. So this is a longer term commitment. And today there is no prorated component to public service loan forgiveness. You apply for your forgiveness at the end of the 10 cumulative years. It does not need to be with one employer. It does not need to be consecutive. You just need to meet the 10 cumulative years requirement. And there are two other components or requirements to it. During that 10 years, you have qualified federal student loans. That's direct federal student loans. We can talk about the nuances of that. But you have to have the right kind of loans, and all students or graduates today that go to accredited schools have direct Department of Education loans today. So they're eligible. And then you need to be in a qualifying repayment plan. And today that's one of the menu of 5. There are now income-driven repayment plans. So essentially, you make payments based on your income for 10 years, no matter what your debt is. And if there's a balance left outstanding at the end of 10 years while you work in a public service role, it gets forgiven tax-free. And that is very substantial for millions of borrowers out there today.
You answered a lot of the questions that, as you were talking, as I was thinking of them, you answered a lot of them. So,
I've been doing this for a little while, so I kind of know where the discussion goes, but it gets more granular for sure. Yeah. And the message can't be heard enough. So fire away.
Exactly. No, I was going to say, so cumulative years. So you could work, for example, 8 years as a school teacher and then take 2 or 3 years off and do something else, and then work another 2 years, go back to public school, work another 2 years as a public school teacher. And that would be your 10. It just took you 13 years. Correct. To get there. And then
and you don't have that. There's no reset of any clock, right? In fact, today, the process is each year. This isn't a mandatory form or process, but we think it is. You complete an employment certification form that your employer actually fills out for you that says, Sean worked for us from June 1st, 2019 to June 1st, 2021. That's 2 years. That's 24 qualifying payments, right? 12 months for the 2 years. Then the Department of Education gets back to you and says, your employer's qualified. They said you worked there full time. You are now 20% of the way towards public service loan forgiveness. So that process now is, you're locked in. Those 24 payments are done. You don't have to start at zero,
right?
If you leave and then come back. The 24 payments are there.
So like a mom who takes time away for having kids, or a dad who takes time away to take care of the kids, they could then go back to work and still eventually qualify.
Yeah, I came at this for many years helping doctors specifically, and realized it became appropriate to anyone with high student debt levels. Doctors actually get a really good summary of their student loan options when they graduate from medical school. That's not, unfortunately, true for other graduate level programs where there's a lot of student loan debt,
like lawyers.
Yep. Yeah. Well, there are good resources out there for lawyers today. In fact, a woman who's on our board was integral in helping attorneys that want to work in public interest participate in loan repayment assistance programs, and then also was integral in advocating for public service loan forgiveness. So the law sector also has some good advocates out there today. Heather Jarvis is who I'm speaking of for those who understand the industry. And she's been an advocate for lawyers and all borrowers for PSLF as well. But lot of other schools, I won't out anyone specifically, they're good at getting you the debt, not so good at helping you pay it back. Yeah. And this program is incredibly generous of the most. Since forgiveness can be unlimited, I think it's the most generous federal or state type of repayment program that's available today.
Yeah, and I mean, it makes a lot of sense because, it's helping to serve maybe a segment of the community or a segment of the population that might not otherwise be served by, it's encouraging people to go into, becoming a police officer, becoming a firefighter, becoming
Absolutely.
a teacher, becoming a doctor, all those different kinds
Absolutely.
of things. So,
and I'll give you an example too. This is one of those granular parts, but let's say doctors, when they graduate from medical school, they have to go into training residency, it's called, and then oftentimes they choose to specialize and do fellowship. That can be 6+ years, right? Where you have $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 in student loan debt, 400, very common. And then you're making $55K a year. So your debt to income ratio it's brutal, right? You can pay very little on your student loans, but that time typically in a teaching hospital counts towards PSLF. You're in a state, Florida, where the hospitals are 501c3s typically, and they hire physicians directly from the 501c3 greater entity. And so that time qualifies for PSLF, whereas in other states, California, where I spent 15 years, if you think about the Kaiser system, which I think is almost a household name, you do your residency there, it's for a nonprofit, but when you get hired by the hospital afterwards, even if it's the same job, same commute, same patients and same colleagues, you start getting paid by a TPMG, the Permanente Medical Group. It's a for-profit group of physicians. You're not PSLF eligible. Now, They pay nicely, but an individual with $500,000 of student loan debt, I've counseled thousands of them that with that high level of debt, they might want to go to Florida for the few years after residency to save a few $100,000. So it moves the needle for some people in terms of their career decisions. Yeah.
I do want to turn a little bit to the pslfjobs.com, your website. And so I've been scrolling through it, especially preparing for today's conversation. Yep. And there's a ton of information on there, but looks like it's geared towards everybody. There's a section for borrowers that want to look at PSLF options. There's a section for nonprofit and government employers. There's a salary calculator. There's a diagnostic test, a PSLF diagnostic you can take. There's blogs. There's podcasts. There's even a job board on there. So it looks like it's pretty comprehensive in terms of whether you're the employer that wants to know, how do I help my employees qualify for PSLF, or whether you're the employee that says, how do I qualify? Or even if you're maybe an employer looking for someone, is what it looks like. So it's a pretty comprehensive website.
We want to accomplish all of those things. We are, in the mission statement or in our tagline, we're the first jobs platform dedicated to this. So we want to serve as a bridge between borrower and employer to make sure that this federal subsidy essentially is maximized, which can help employers recruit and retain talent. And it also makes the borrower's economic situation better. So all of those things are what we offer. We want individual borrowers to figure out, are they a PSLF candidate, and how meaningful is that? So if we explain, again, those requirements for PSLF, you got to pay based on your income for 10 years. So if you're going to make $50,000 a year, and that grows, say, with the rate of inflation for 10 years, and so 3% a year, your salary goes up. I know that those payments monthly on a student loan balance are probably around $250 a month in an income-driven repayment plan. If you got $100,000 in student loan debt, your 10-year standard repayment plan is about $1,100 per month, maybe $1,200 per month. So that delta is what's accumulating as forgiveness over 10 years. It's substantial, right? So our calculator helps figure that out. There are some folks who, if you flip that script and you're making $100K and you only have $50K in student loan debt, I won't say I don't care where you work, but the public service loan forgiveness program wouldn't move the needle for you on your decision around where to work. You wouldn't be eligible for public service loan forgiveness. $100,000 income is going to demand a payment around $700 a month, and $50K is paid back before the 10 years is up. You're actually not a PSLF candidate. So the first thing we want borrowers to do is understand, should you be participating in this? And if that savings is substantial, you might want to put your hat in the ring of looking for a PSLF job.
Yeah, and I don't think you'd be a PSLF candidate because you wouldn't be an income-driven payment plan candidate, and that's one of the requirements.
Exactly. Yep. A lot. When you come out of school, if you file a tax return or you go into an income-driven plan before you've actually started working, you can get in that first year with a tax return that shows zero or very little income. You can get into income-based repayment or pay-as-you-earn, and revised pay-as-you-earn has no barrier to entry, but it's just not appropriate if you have a good debt-to-income ratio. And so you can sneak into those programs, but you quickly get to the cap and are paying your debt back.
Right.
So the calculator tries to figure that out for folks to make sure that they're in the right plan.
Okay. And so, again, it looks like the website is both for employees or borrowers in this case and employers.
That's correct. So we have an enterprise version of that calculator that HR or recruiters can invite recruits or current staff in to make sure, if they're PSLF candidates, that they're aware of it. And then HR, we want to start, think of this as when your health benefits are renewing every year and there's this window, right? Wouldn't it be great if your employer gathered up all the PSLF candidates and said, we're going to do your employment certification. Now, make sure you've renewed your income-driven repayment plan. Like you said at the beginning of this in the intro, and it's on our website, the employers haven't typically been involved in this, and borrowers have been needing that, right? Servicers have failed them. People like us, you, Sean, and me with Doctors Without Quarters and PSLF jobs, we're advocating for borrowers out there, but servicers haven't historically done that. We hope that they do administrative things without error, but strategically they have not historically served borrowers well. So getting the employers involved to make sure that they're maximizing this is important. And now with the overhaul of PSLF that was announced a couple weeks ago, which affects over 500,000 borrowers overnight, making some immediately eligible for loan forgiveness and about 500,000 more moving them towards loan forgiveness by an average, I think they said, of like 23 months. Now the employers know that this is a real thing. They're getting approached by their staff, former staff and current staff now, to certify employment, past employment, and they actually want to learn about this now because credibility has been given to this program. I always knew it was credible because I've been following this for 11 years. And I knew that the initial borrowers were going to have issues related to the application of loan forgiveness because often they didn't have the right loans and they were steered into the wrong repayment plans, or those mistakes were made by servicers. But, there's 10,000 people have gotten their loans forgiven to date, roughly. And there's 1.2 million people in the queue for about $125 billion of student loan debt. This is these shoes about to drop, or whatever that cliche is. Well, and in terms of lots of loan forgiveness.
Yeah, what you're talking about is, I think the Department of Education wrapping in some of the old FFEL loans into the PSLF program. So we're throwing around a couple of acronyms here. We've been talking about PSLF. FFEL stands for
Family Federal Education Loan.
Okay.
Yeah. And so before there's a date, I don't expect everybody to remember this, but it gives context to the date, July 1st, 2010, 11 years ago-ish. The Obama administration essentially nationalized student loans, right? And so from July 1st, 2010 on through today, and we expect that to exist at least through the Biden administration, with the Biden administration at the helm, and probably beyond that, but won't speak for the future. The nationalization of student loans meant that your student loans come from the Department of Education. That's technically your lender. Those are called direct student loans. Those are automatically eligible for public service loan forgiveness. But any loans lent in the years prior to, or even the day prior to July 1st, 2010, those were called these FFEL loans. Before the nationalization of student loans, there was a government regulated lending, student lending platform, if you will, that allowed private lenders to participate in federal lending to fit that need in the marketplace. Those FFEL loans, because they were lent by private lenders, unless the government takes those loans over, they're not forgiving those loans. They were never eligible for PSLF. So those lenders were interested in making sure they held on to those loans. And that's where a lot of misinformation and bad advice came from the navigation of PSLF. Those loans were not eligible, but you could still go into an income-driven repayment plan like ICR or IBR, some of those older income-driven plans, and think that you're on track for PSLF when in fact you weren't. So those FFEL loans, getting to the overhaul that was announced a couple weeks ago, payments on those now count as long as within the next year you consolidate those loans to a direct loan. So anyone out there that has the FFEL loans that is interested in or otherwise curious about their progress towards PSLF or wants to pursue it should consolidate those FFEL loans over to direct loans. The window is open for a full year for your previous payments to count on them and for them to then count going forward.
Okay, cool. So couple things I want to talk about real quick here. And you've already mentioned a lot of it, that this is going to impact 500,000 borrowers. It's going to impact, a lot of people that are enrolled in the program. Is it enough? Is it enough to help with student loans given, I know Congress is kicking around the idea, and so is the president kicking around the idea of reducing student loan balances, of giving, whatever. Is it enough?
This is a great question. And I try to, when I answer this question, just talk about the marketplace in general and what opportunities are available without sort of a partisan take, because I could see both sides here, right? I see that blanket loan forgiveness for everyone. I see both Republicans and Democrats in many cases against that. Like, I paid my debt back. Why can't you? And so there are income thresholds related to that. Prior to the pandemic, only about 12% of borrowers were actually in some state of default, right? Another 10 to 12% were in forbearance, which you could call that private marketplace wouldn't let you go into forbearance and not pay anything and have your debt balloon. That you'd be quickly in default. So maybe that number is a little misleading, but a lot of folks can pay their loans back. And so I appreciate the Biden administration's efforts towards honoring PSLF, in that when you do meaningful work, that's going to impact the bottom line when it comes to student loan debt, that savings is available there, and targeting those who were taken advantage of by for-profit schools, those who are in bankruptcy. We're starting to see billions of dollars of loan forgiveness granted strategically, more than we are blanket loan forgiveness than for everyone. Because I don't think everyone needs it, but I think there's areas of great need. And a lot of that comes into, but a lot of that appears with public servants, teachers, social workers, family services organizations that can't compete with the private sector. There's a lot of student loan debt out there for those degrees. And the nonprofit sector, the government sector, can't pay as much as the private sector does. This helps move the needle in terms of helping there. And I'd have to say, from the perspective of when you go to graduate school, those rates are somewhere between 6% and 8% on your federal student loans.
Right.
There's a profit center there where they should be actually allocating this money towards those in the greatest need. But again, I try not to take a partisan take. The majority of student loan borrowers out there today can pay this stuff back, but there's a certain percentage that are default or forbearance, that the bleeding of accruing interest is getting worse, or their credit scores are getting worse, and then they can't contribute to the economy because they can't get mortgages and get car loans and all of that. So there's a problem out there, but I think the help can be targeted, and I think that this administration is moving that way, which for me, I think I appreciate that effort.
Right. Okay, so the administration does have some plan in place, and I know Congress is working on some plan in place, and so it's good to know that they're at least working on it.
Yeah, I believe that Elizabeth Warren, AOC, Chuck Schumer, those have been sort of the advocates for this $50,000 of loan forgiveness for everybody above, I think it's $125,000 in income. I think they even put out a demand for some memo from the administration on what are you going to do with broad cancellation. So we may see some action on that, or at least answer on that soon. Me personally, I don't expect 50K. I wouldn't be shocked if there was 10K blanket loan cancellation for people under the income threshold. I think they named around, like I said, about 125,000, but I'm not expecting it.
Yeah.
I think the targeted loan forgiveness and cancellation for people that are in bankruptcy situations, for people that were defrauded essentially by for-profit schools, and then those in greater areas of need where they're working in public service roles via PSLF. There's a lot of resources going towards that right now.
Yeah, and to give myself a little bit of a plug here, I know that there's also some conversation about making student loans possibly dischargeable at some level within bankruptcy court. That's also being worked on. And then I know some courts are even making inroads into some of the. There is a couple of court decisions that provide tests for discharging student loans in bankruptcy if the borrowers meet certain hardship qualifications. And I know that there's a lot of court battles going on right now that are making inroads into those tests and in essence making it easier to try to get one of those hardship discharges, although they're still pretty difficult to get in bankruptcy court. But it's
moving in the borrower's favor.
Right.
Now.
It's moving in the borrower's favor, especially here in Florida. There's been the big test here is the Bruner decision, and I know there's been some inroads here in terms of the courts are making this hardship discharge a little bit more than what the original case anticipated, and so some judges are making inroads there. But it's still a process. One thing that you mentioned that was interesting is some of the fraud or some of the misdirection by some of these for-profit schools or non-accredited schools.
Yeah,
and then so I want to talk about that a little bit. But then again, you also mentioned some of the servicers, and I know that we have some servicers out there that people, and I get it. I mean, some of it's probably well-deserved. Some of the criticism on Navient, some of the criticism on FedLoan and some of the other servicers is probably well-deserved. Some of it, I would think, is not well-deserved. You just got, people doing a thankless job trying to, service these student loans. But I
feel you on that. Absolutely. The other side of that, the service reps that you have to talk to, almost feel bad.
Right.
That's it's not the most pleasant conversation to talk about student loan debt. It's a painful topic for a lot of people, and they're on the front lines doing it every day. They're often not, just the marketplace is complex. It's hard to know everything. And most of the time, those service reps on the front lines there are learning as well. It's a challenge.
But I know that FedLoan and Navient are getting out of the business here pretty soon.
Yep.
And they're being replaced by Mohela and Maximus.
That's right.
Maybe talk a little bit about how you think that might impact things here.
Yep. We'll do the two separately. So the first is, and more involved for me on a daily basis, would be the FedLoans move, because FedLoans is the contracted servicer for public service loan forgiveness. So I mentioned there's 1.2 roughly million people participating in that program now, and there's probably over the course of the next year with this overhaul, and maybe even a couple 100,000 or more that are going to move into pursuing PSLF because of the overhaul. It will now qualify. Maybe it's even larger than that. But FedLoans is the contracted servicer for public service loan forgiveness. So they have announced that they're not going to renew their contract with the Department of Education, which means there needs to be a new loan servicer contracted with the Department of Education to facilitate PSLF. And FedLoans was managing the student loans for about 9 million borrowers. So it's the biggest, I believe, of all the loan servicing contracts for federal student loans. So Mohela is stepping in and taking over. Some borrowers even got the announcement already that Mohela is going to be taken over. My personal perspective on that is when it comes to manipulation and where the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is targeting some of their ire, if you will, towards loan servicers. I think Fed loans is more, as you kind of said, it's an overwhelming amount of data that they're dealing with, and errors have been made when it comes to facilitating the administration and servicing these loans over the years. So I think Fed loans has been more guilty of making errors without bad intention. We have folks over at Fed loans that are great advocates for borrowers and want to help borrowers and work with us to make sure that things go smoothly with Doctors Without Borders, our advisory there, and just in the general supporting people for PSLF. But I think as a general rule, they want to get out of federal loan servicing. And Mohela has been a great loan servicer from our experience over the years. They've been around for a little while. Some of the private refinancing companies that are out there use Mohela to service loans. And we have a couple advisors that used to work there at Doctors Without Borders. And they're excellent advisors. They needed the least amount of training. We even learned a little bit from them because they've been around for a while in a couple of cases. And so I actually have a pretty optimistic take on the fact that loan servicers changing. That's not to say that errors won't happen, that it will be completely seamless and errorless. That probably won't be true. But with the technology that exists today and the fact that studentaid.gov is now where people can go to do income-driven repayment plan renewals, consolidate loans, which will be necessary for this overhaul of PSLF and otherwise for some borrowers. All of that is really at the studentaid.gov platform, where probably people should more be navigating their federal student loans. That's a central database. So the servicer becomes different from Fed loans to Mohela. If your data is still held at studentaid.gov, there should be less errors than there have in the past, where there wasn't really a central portal like there is now. So I do think that will reduce errors, but I'm optimistic about the servicing experience once things are transitioned over. And some have said, is Fed loans going to get out right at December 14th when technically they can? I don't think that's the case. Some of the folks we're talking over there suggesting that they're being asked to stick around into Q2 or Q3 of next year. So they're committed to making a seamless transition. Navient is getting out that they were spun off from Sallie Mae years ago.
Right.
And Navient is the federal loan servicing group. They're under fire for more manipulative kind of stuff. I've seen it just in my years doing this. They're getting out as well, but they did just commit to hanging around for 2 more years. That's 6 million borrowers that are impacted there. Again, Navient's not the PSLF contracted servicer, but the loans are going over to Maximus. Maximus has historically been the servicer who is involved in managing defaulted loans. So I know less about. I'm trying to keep people out of default in my day-to-day operation, so I know less about the servicer experience with Maximus. But I know that there's some excitement. And again, there's great people over at Navient. I think as a general rule, things got out of control there for a little while in terms of the customer service component of, the lenders weren't incented to always give the borrowers best advice because they were going to lose business if they did that. Right. And I think that Navient's guilty of that in some cases. And so some people ask, is that, good grief, servicers are changing. In some cases, I kind of say good riddance onto the new. And so I know less about Maximus in terms of the servicer experience there. But again, with the central portal, I'm hoping that errors are at a minimum when that ultimately transition is done. And I think that's going to take a couple years with Navient.
Yeah, and given the size and the scope, like you said, 9 million borrowers to 6 million borrowers, there's going to be a little bit of grinding of the gears to make sure everything transitions smoothly. Well, if people want to find out more about you or about PSLF Jobs, they can go to pslfjobs.com.
That's right.
They can email you help@pslfjobs.com.
That's right.
So anybody, employer, employee that wants more information, PSLF. Go ahead.
If you're an employer that's getting either past staff or current staff coming to you saying, need you to fill out this employment certification form. So think a lot of who we're talking to now is in public schools. And I've been working with doctors and hospitals for a decade, over a decade now. So I certainly know that there's PSLF in large numbers available at those types of institutions. So if you work in one of those institutions and you're wanting to learn more about the employment certification process and what does all that mean for people, definitely contact us. I want both borrowers and employers to know that there's one place they can go that serves as a bridge between those two. If you want to search PSLF qualified jobs, we've got 13,000 jobs roughly on the platform now. We're either aggregating them from other places. Like we have a API set up with Idealist to feature their full-time nonprofit qualified jobs on our jobs platform. So the jobs that appear there, the employers are generally committed to helping their recruits and their staff pursue and maximize public service loan forgiveness. And then I'll give you, your listeners, if they want to use our salary calculator, it takes less than 5 minutes to go through this thing. It's linked to on our website. If you create an individual account there, an individual registration, if you use the word forgiveness, all lowercase, forgiveness at where it says coupon code or coupon, you won't be prompted for any payment. You can go through our salary calculator and get its results there, which will tell you if you're a PSLF candidate or not.
Wow, cool. I appreciate that. Thank you. I will.
Yeah, of course.
I'll put in the notes that you've made that offer, but I won't put what the offer is, so people will have to listen to get it. So that's awesome. And
there you go.
I assume that the jobs that you have are pretty much all over the country, or are they focused on?
We definitely, I don't have a geographic any sort of preference. I live in Phoenix area, Arizona now, but there aren't more Arizona jobs on it than any other place. But I'm working with hospital recruiters for all clinicians, not just doctors, to post their jobs there. And then we've got a lot of public and charter schools on the line right now who are doing education through us to their staff. And we find a lot of opportunity for PSLF in public school staff in general. But if you're one of these 35 million individuals is our best guess of PSLF qualified employment. Not everybody has student loan debt in those jobs. So it's not that there's 35 million PSLF candidate potential out there, but the number is larger than it is today.
Right.
And we want to make sure that people are taking advantage of it by doing meaningful work. And that's what PSLF Jobs is all about.
Well, nice. Well, I appreciate you being a guest on the show. As we sort of get to the end, is there anything you want to add? Anything I didn't ask you?
No, I think that you covered, all the good stuff that's going on right now, the PSLF overhaul, and that the credibility that's been now given to that program because of this recent announcement by the Biden administration. And then those servicers changes, that has historically been uncomfortable for folks. I have an optimistic take on it because of at least for the case of Fed loans to Mohella, good experiences with Mohella and Fed loans seeming committed to make that transition smooth. But for individual borrowers out there, make sure everything's up to date, your address, right? Your contact information.
Right.
And if you're pursuing PSLF, get an employment certification form in from Fed loans before December 14th, ideally by 12/1, so that you have the most recent count. So do your part to make sure that things are up to date when things switch. And as they do, monitor the communications that you're getting, make for accuracy.
Very nice. Well,
Yeah.
Again, thank you. The website is pslfjobs.com. And again, help@pslfjobs.com if you want to shoot Jason and his team an email. Jason DiLorenzo, thank you. I really appreciate you being a guest and all the information that you provided today.
Good talking to you. I appreciate you doing the work that you're doing, and happy to chat again anytime.
Yeah, absolutely. We can get something set up again for the future. So I think that'll do it for this week's episode of the Crushing Debt podcast. Like I say at the end of every episode, I hope especially with today's guest that you got some tips here so that at the end of the month you have more money rather than at the end of the money you have more month. That'll do it for this week's episode of the Crushing Debt podcast, and we look forward to talking to you in next week's episode.
If you have questions that you think would make a great topic for a future episode, please email Sean or connect with us on social media. Sean Yesner and Yesner Law, PL, are Florida licensed attorneys. The information contained in this week's episode is not a substitute for legal advice. Your situation may differ, especially if you are located somewhere other than the state of Florida. If you have questions, please contact our office or contact a local attorney. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast.